Welcome to the MI Hunting Podcast. This episode, we'll be going over the final preparations needing to get done for the 2023 season. All right, welcome to the MI Podcast. Thank you for tuning in as always. So we are looking at the second week of August right now, and we only have about a month and a half until the opening of the regular archery season. Now we do have here in Michigan, the youth hunt and liberty hunt, as well as an early doe antler season here that's coming up in September as well. But the bulk of the hunting really isn't going to start until October 1st, as that's when bow season opens up for the general public. And with that being said, we don't have much time, especially if you're one that likes to have your hunting areas kind of soak for a little bit without any significant pressure. We really only have, about 3 weeks to really get done what we need to get done before we back out of the properties and give them time without any human pressure or interference or disturbance. So really, especially looking at this time frame, I'm looking at the things that I need to get done primarily in my hunting aspect, which I'm sure if you're like me and have procrastinated some areas, you're starting to sweat it a little bit and starting to feel the pressure of things that you need to get done to be ready for the deer season. I always go into with high hopes of being able to get everything done and be ahead of the game. But in most cases, I always find myself in at least some areas, struggling to keep up and get everything done beforehand. So some of the things that I'm going to be really focusing on this time of the year is getting my food plot work done, making sure my bow setup's ready to go and tuned up, ready to go, making sure I have all the necessary equipment that I was hoping for the year. So that's for both archery season as well as for the firearm season. The big one with that, again, is ammunition. Doing some last minute scouting and then making sure my tree stand work is done for the season. So we'll get more into depth in each of those areas, and I'll explain kind of what I'm doing and what I've been planning on accomplishing before the season starts to make sure I am ready in those aspects. But before we get into those topics, let's go ahead and jump over to the conservation news desk. It's been a while since I've done one of these, and there's a couple of news stories that I wanted to highlight and cover with you. So let's jump into it. All right, so this first story comes to us from Outdoor Life. This was updated on August 2nd by Dak Collins. Another walleye stuffing cheater caught in a fishing tournament in New York. And below the headline there, it pretty much sums up the idea once you even read the headline. It's stupid what he did, especially after last year. I still can't believe it. So let's get into it here. So the first paragraph here is a less dramatic version of the Weight scandal that rocked the professional fishing world in October of 2022 took place over the weekend in Dunkirk, New York on July 30th. A competitor in Bart's Cove Walleye Duel was caught stuffing walleyes to increase their weight. So it's amazing that someone would try this again after what had happened last year with the weights in the fish story. That was pretty big, and it kind of made its way through the country as being part of the news. This was a quite blatant cheating scandal that kind of rocked even rocked the main headlines with what was going on. So this one, it's not quite as drastic or compelling of a story as that first one. Certainly didn't have the amount of drama in it. But again, is this kind of one of those things you wonder what possessed this person to take these steps, especially with the scrutiny that a lot of these tournaments are now having because of the incident last year. So basically, from this tournament, their procedure or policy was to cut open these fish at weigh-in because of the concern of cheating and whatnot. So basically, this competitor, Mr. Pete Smith, stuffed his walleyes with two small. Oh, I'm sorry, let me go back. Yeah, so Pete Smith had stuffed two of his walleyes with smaller fish to increase their weight. And in one of them, a 12-inch walleye with his tail cut off was inside one of the fish. And the other had a white perch stuffed in it. So basically, what was going on is that basically trying to shove these fish down their larger fish's throats, and one actually was too large for that to fit in the other fish, so they actually cut 3 inches off of its tail to make it fit. I suppose they were trying to make it look more natural, that maybe those walleye had eaten the fish and were digesting them. The problem was of a couple different things. So the judge of the event, noted a couple different things. One is that the fish were far too bright. They weren't faded in any way. They weren't, basically they hadn't gone through any of the digestive process. So they basically look like fresh fish. The other one, again, clearly was cut, basically the last 3 inches of its tail. And if you look at the photo of the fish, you can clearly see that it definitely looks like a knife cut. And the amount of the tail that was cut off, it would have been very difficult for even a walleye to cut through the spinal cord of that fish and create that clean of a cut. The other thing that was noted with the fish is that these fish clearly had hook marks or hook holes in their lips, so they had been caught with a hook and line and then proceeded to get shoved down these other fish's throats. So the fact that they were trying to get away with this, even though in the rules it clearly stated that during this tournament that the fish were going to be cut open and inspected, I'm not quite sure why they thought they were going to get away with this. So, and even with this, the tournament director, knew Mr. Smith and his family, and was really hesitant to disqualify him on the spot because of the escalation of people's reactions from the event from last year. So what he ended up doing was contacting officials from the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, and they were the ones that confiscated the fish. And basically that investigation at this point is still ongoing. I'm not quite sure of what criminal charges would come of this, so if they might face any penalty for this other than the fact of being shamed for cheating. So probably the more interesting bit about this is that Mr. Pete Smith really didn't even need to cheat to necessarily win the tournament. Apparently, he had already secured a high enough bag to basically still have won the tournament. So the director goes on, but the thing about is that Pete didn't have to stuff them. He only gained maybe 10 to 12 ounces, less than a pound. But he had a 22-something pound bag, and the next closest was 19. So this guy got caught for cheating during a walleye tournament that he would have won anyway. So, and if I'm not mistaken, the guys from the tournament, back from last year, they ran into a similar situation where there's a good likelihood that they would have won the tournament outright, even without cheating. I think it came down to what caught the judge's eye in that tournament was the fact that they had such a high limit compared to everyone else. Everyone else kind of had a hard time fishing that day and was, had smaller bag limits. And these guys were like, 2-3 pounds above everybody else easily. I think it was even more than that. So that what really caught the attention. So this guy, again, same thing. He sounds like he would have won the tournament even without having to stuff the fish. So it just goes, again, another instance of, it's not worth it trying to cheat in this aspect. The likelihood of getting caught is very high, and then you never know. You may, be putting yourself at a risk of, getting caught, needlessly, essentially. So again, there'll be more to come on this guy for sure. It's not quite sure on what his, future looks like in this regard. I'm sure that he's probably not going to be invited for any more fishing tournaments. But again, in regards to any criminal charges, who knows on that one. All right, let's get into this article here. This one is not quite as lighthearted or interesting as the first one in regards to just someone doing something stupid. This one here comes down to some changes that are going to happen, unfortunately, for the worse in many cases. So the headline here is Biden admin withholding key funding for schools with hunting and archery programs. So this is from Fox News, published on July 28th. So it goes on to say, Biden administration is leveling a direct attack on hunters' ability to pass down hunting in the newest generations. So essentially what's going on is that any programs that involve either hunting and archery programs, so any honor safety ed or any shooting clubs or archery programs, basically are no longer going to receive any type of funding. Initially when going through this, it looked like that any schools that were holding or having these programs as part of their curriculum, that they were not going to receive any funding at all. It doesn't seem to be the case. It's only that they will not be able to use any of those federal funds for these programs, which, again, in many instances, it doesn't seem like a lot of these programs were getting much funding anyways. But in certain school districts and certain programs, they were receiving a significant amount of funding. So it just kind of depends on, I guess, really the school and how they're allocating those funds as to how much of an impact it has in regards to this funding in these programs. So this is part of a reaction from the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. It looks like that the Department of Education has, interpreted it as that these programs are not, basically, or these programs are in violation or do not support from this law. So they are banning any funding to go to any of these programs. So really the two things to really focus on with this, this news and this article is that it's coming from the Department of Education has made this determination, and is as a result of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Now, a Democratic senator from Colorado has basically sent a letter to the Department of Education, basically requesting that they reconsider their decision. So I looked into it a little bit more and kind of got a synopsis of what the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act is. Now, this is actually an 80-page bill, so I didn't read through the whole thing. So I went through Mappedia to just kind of get synopsis of kind of what the bill was intended for, what the goals are. So we'll cover those here real quick. So, basically some of the key bullet points are expanding background checks for individuals under the age of 21 purchasing firearms, provide $11 billion in mental health services, including increased funding for Medicaid certified community behavioral health clinic programs, increased funding for school-based mental health programs, and investment in pediatric mental health care services. Preventing individuals who've been convicted of domestic violence, misdemeanor, or felony in dating relationships from purchasing firearms for 5 years, providing $750 million for state grants to implement crisis intervention order programs, also referred to as red flag laws, that would allow authorities to confiscate firearms for individuals who have been determined by the court to be sufficient to be a sufficient danger to themselves or others. The grant would also be used to support mental health courts, drug courts, veterans courts, and extreme risk protection orders, providing $2 million in community-based violence prevention initiatives. So a lot of this is just simply provide funding and resources to basically crack down on basically those who would misuse firearms. So basically the senator that wrote the letter kind of summed it up really well as well, that these programs are basically good tools to ensure safety of use of firearms and archery equipment and whatnot. These are programs to make people safer with firearms and basically educate them on the dangers associated with. So the fact that they're cutting these programs or making an effort to cut these programs does not align with the bill that they say that it's supposed to follow. So, it definitely has a little bit of a flavor of that they're trying to, cut these programs because they just simply don't like the programs outright. There certainly has been a strong push from the anti-hunting groups to get these programs out of the school systems, and get basically to shut down as much as they can in that regard. So definitely has kind of that feel, but again, it's going to be hard pressed to really get that answer or to really determine if that's what's going on here, or if they just simply misinterpreted the law. But yeah, you kind of be the judge on that. So yeah, just wanted to highlight that, and something to keep an eye out for. Certainly too, if you are looking to voice your opinion on this, or to basically to have a voice in that regard, there are several outlets, the Safari Club, as well as the Sportsman Alliance. They have links to where you can follow those, to send to your congressperson, to basically give your opinion on the subject matter, and to push back on this if you so choose to do so. All right, so that's it for the news portion of it. Again, there's going to be more information linked down into the description. So if you do want to follow any of those links, I will put them down in the description below to where you can follow those, and submit those forms. All right, so let's get into the topic at hand here. So yeah, really, I mean, we are down to the wire when it comes to the preparation for deer season. One of the big things that I've been really stressing about, especially during that first week of August, was trying to get my food plots in. We've had a pretty significant spotty regards to when the rain was going to come, as well as I had our family vacation plan for this past week as well. So I was looking at the rain forecast and trying to decide on if I'm going to try to plant before we leave for our vacation, or try to catch it afterwards. I really didn't like the idea of doing it after, because that put those plants a couple weeks further back, or delayed, on starting to germinate and start growing and start to put on some biomass than I typically like to do. The rain forecast wasn't the best though, but then we did have a day that looked promising. So I ultimately ended up deciding that I was going to plant on that day. Unfortunately, the rain that was intended the following night really never came. So we'll see what happens in that regard. Hopefully I still get pretty good germination. I kind of get a little worried, because that's essentially what happened when I tried planting my summer or my springtime, cover crop / food plot. Ultimately I planted, and we had a pretty decent chance of rain for the following day, and it just never came. And of course, everyone knows we had quite the dry summer, where a lot of the summer food plots really didn't take off like they should have. So when it came to my springtime planting, I was kind of up in the air exactly how I wanted to handle this. So essentially what had happened during the course of the summer, or from that summer planning, I tried for the very first time using a roller crimper. Now, I had some mixed success with that in regards to some of the plant species. It did really well at being able to crimp. So a lot of like the really stemmy stuff, so the rye, crimson clover, even some of the old brassicas that were starting to stem out, and trying to flower, those were crimped down really well. The two areas that I really didn't have any good success was with the two areas the two different species that really didn't do all that well, whereas the white clover, that really didn't get terminated. It did get set back a little bit. It did look like it was starting to die, but those plants bounced right back up again and ended up coming up again and kind of taking over that area where they were really dominant beforehand as well. The other one again was the hairy vetch that was in the mix from the fall carbon load. This is kind of like a bit of a stemmy, kind of viney type plant. That one, it didn't get basically destroyed at all, or didn't start to die at all. It got laid down with all the rest of the plants, but shortly after it stood right back up, stayed green, flowered out. And it wasn't until probably the summer, when it probably seeded out, unfortunately, that it finally did die off. Because when I went back this a couple weeks ago, that plant was really pretty much dried up and dead. So basically, what I had on my hands was one, a lack of the summertime, crop coming in. I didn't get a good germination. It didn't grow in because of the dry weather, and so I had a lot of thatch from the rye and the crimson clover that got killed off beforehand, as well as a bunch of other vegetation and even some weed growth that kind of made its way through without any sufficient ground cover. So I basically kind of chalked up that I had two different options. One was to come through with a tiller and do a mechanical tillage and terminate the plants that way by just tilling them up, breaking them up, uprooting them. Or the other option was to use glyphosate and spray them out and do a chemical burn on them. Both of them had their pros and cons. The mechanical use is, I didn't have to use any harsh chemicals. The problem is I break up that soil, expose a lot of, basically uproot a lot of that organic matter, the carbon, as well as destroy a lot of the microbes that were in that soil. Basically, that mechanical process destroys some of the larger microbes, and then also it basically over aerates the soil essentially, and can make it towards a very harsh environment for those microbes to survive with that mechanical process. And then when it came to the chemical, again, you're using chemicals, using glyphosate or Roundup, and there's some precautions with that, as well as things I've learned in regards to the fact that it can inhibit your plant's ability to uptake nutrients, or kind of suppresses some of your nutrients in the soil. So if you have some mineral deficiencies, it may be as a result of some of that glyphosate now allowing those minerals to be basically uptaken by the plants. The plus side of using glyphosate is I'm not disturbing the soil at all. Everything stays intact, so I'm not uprooting anything. I'm not disturbing the soil, keeping that soil covered in that regard. The other downfall with the glyphosate is that I did have that additional thatch. That thatch is not going to get broken down anymore than what the new plants can do in regards to coming up, and then the microbes eating up that thatch and whatnot, breaking that down. I guess that was the other plus side with doing the potential of tillage, is that I have a nice clean soil bed to work with no buildup of thatch that's going to prevent any seed to soil contact, or not going to be too thick of a mulch to where the seeds can't push their way through before they run out of energy. So ultimately, for this time through, I went with the spray method. So per my usual process, I spread the seed out into the standing vegetation. Once that's done, went through, sprayed it, and then cultipacted it behind me after spraying to lay everything down to try to push it down and push those seeds in the ground with that thatch laying on top of them. So, and ultimately, from here on out, I'm not going to go back to the property or not look at the food plot area, at least for another 2 weeks or so. I've made the mistake before where I go down there too early, and those plants are really starting to just come in, and feeling really disappointed the fact that it's not looking as good as I thought. So a lot of times with that, I just give it time. And then, an absolute worst case scenario, that if for whatever reason these seeds didn't germinate, or I didn't get a good stand, or I didn't seed evenly, if I have, bare spots and whatnot, then I'll go through usually around that first week of September, or actually about 1st of September to about mid-September, and supplement with some just, rye grain, and fill in those bare spots, or make up for any areas that didn't come in as well as they should have. So the next big area that really needs to get done before season gets underway is making sure, especially your bow equipment, is ready to go. So for me, I essentially have bought a brand new bow. I purchased the brand new Prime Revex 2, and basically I'm finishing up the process of getting that bow broken in and tuned in. So I put about pretty close to about 200 arrows through it since I've gotten it. I'm going to take it back to the bow shop, make sure everything's still in line, because that string is going to stretch out. Everything's going to kind of settle into place. Make sure everything's tuned up again, make sure everything's still plumb. And then from there, I'm going to finish my sighting in process. Now, fortunately, this bow has pretty close to the same specs that my old bow had. Technically, it's about 3 feet per second slower, but in regards to the accuracy so far, it seems pretty on par with what my current or what my old bow was in regards to my sight tapes and everything like that. So I've actually been able to just make some adjustments to the housing or the mount for the housing for my new bow, and I haven't had to move any of the sight tapes yet. But I'm not going to finish or not going to say it's sighted in yet until I get that final tune up done, and I know that that bow is shooting the way it's going to pretty much for the rest of the season. From there, gonna fine tune, make sure those sight tapes are accurate and that the bow is shooting on spec. If it's not, I'm gonna have to pull those sight tapes off, reapply or basically re-sight in and apply a new sight tape that matches with the new bow setup. So in regards to my arrow setup, that's gonna stay the same. Fortunately, I'm not gonna make too much of a change with that. I've already played around with quite a bit of different fletching configurations. I pretty much got my arrow weight down, so that's not going to change too much. Basically, I've kind of already dialed into what fletching configuration I'm going to run for the season. A couple of different changes I am going to make that I do still need to finish up, getting the rest of the arrows set up, is I'm going to be adding a white wrap to all of my arrows. It's going to be all of my arrows. Now, the big one is, the main reason is that is for the hunting scenario. So I typically run on orange fletching, but the downfall is, again, during the fall, they can be kind of hard to see in some of those leaves. I figured going with orange was going to be a nice bright color that would be easy to see. Not so much. I didn't really think that one through. But the big thing is that when it comes to looking at the arrow and determining the type of blood that's on it, with the color scheme of the arrow and the fletchings, you really had to either wipe some blood on your hands off the arrow, or really look at what's on the ground to really get a good idea of the shade or the tint of the blood, really. So I'm adding a white wrap on there to make that easier. So when I look, when I inspect that arrow, I'm able to make a little bit better educated guess on exactly what's going on with that. I've also going to add in a white fletching as well. So it's going to add some additional white to it to be able to help get a better picture of that blood as well on that arrow. The other thing I'm going to be doing this year is playing around again with some of my broadheads. For one, harvest a deer with a single bevel broadhead. Last year I used 3 different broadheads and harvested 3 different deer with it, and basically just kind of trying to collect some data on the performance of those broadhead types or styles in regards to my archery setup and just hunting in general. So for those ones, I have had some good success. There have been a couple of areas of concern, primarily with the smaller cutting diameter of a couple of the broadheads. They basically, if you're like me and end up hitting high, you don't get a good blood trail. Essentially, from the smaller diameter hole, as well as with the chest cavity filling up before it really spills out onto the ground. So a couple of things with that, certainly did not impede with the deer dying in a timely manner, but it did affect, my confidence when it came to the tracking job. So I am going to play around with that, as well as I'm going to be trying out the new VPA Omega broadhead. It's their one that we discussed back on episode 66. So if you haven't listened to that, go ahead and listen to that one. They talk about the broadhead more in detail. Basically what it is a single bevel broadhead that you don't really need any special jigs or contraptions to get it sharpened just right. One downfall with the single bevel broadheads is that they are a little bit more complicated to sharpen or resharpen, especially. Basically, you need a special jig to be able to get the angle just right. And what they've done was incorporated a patented design to where you can just lay the broadhead flat down on the stone, has basically kind of like a flat edge on part of the ferrule. That's going to be your guide, and you just run that along your sanding stone or sandpaper, whatever you're using to sharpen your broadhead, and it makes things very simpler. So, I've got one on hand here. Now, this only took me probably about 10-15 minutes. So it comes factory sharpened. So basically, if you really wanted to, you could hunt right out of the package. But again, if you're going to take the time to spend the extra money on this type of broadhead, you're more than likely going to be putting a little bit better edge on it than what they can do in the factory. And, with this one here, it took me about 10-15 minutes, and, got a pretty good polish on there. And, I tested it, and it is razor sharp here. So again, even with my capabilities, being able to sharpen these broadheads in a short period of time, I got even better edge on it. And it's kind of, it's at that on the verge of being kind of scary sharp, even with my limited ability with sharpening. So these are new out for this year. Right now, I believe they are in a 200 grain. I'm sure they'll be working on getting, I think, a 150 as well here in the near future. So, very cool design. Again, it's going to still have the benefit of the single bevel, where it's going to have a very good potential for penetration because of the steep angle of the blade, as well as it has the kind of that tried and true Tonto tip on it. So it's still a cut on contact, but with those angles on it, it gives that a lot more material on the tip that's going to be less likely to get damaged if you hit bone, or even if you drive it into the dirt and hit stone. And it, again, with that single bevel, it's going to have that ability to basically split stone, or cut through, or not stone, cut through bone much easier. And then again, that additional material is just strengthening that broadhead and making it more durable as well. So I'm going to be excited to try this one out this year. Hopefully I get an opportunity or two to be able to put these broadheads to the test. But so far it's looking pretty promising. Again, the Omega from VPA. So certainly if you're looking at a new broadhead, they wouldn't be a bad choice for you. So the next part is, again, I always harp on this probably this time every year, is making sure that you've got the equipment that you're wanting for the year. So this in regards to if you're looking at getting new tree stands, new camo, new calls. Again, if you're like me and bought a new bow, time is really ticking now if you want to get that all set up and ready to go in a timely manner, and make sure that you're comfortable and ready to go for the season. So yeah, it's really just making sure that you buy this, the equipment that you're looking to invest into now, sooner or before later, because you don't want to run into, we kind of learned during COVID that, that there are disruptions in the supply chain, and what you order, a couple weeks from now may not even make it in time for hunting season, and you may have to supplement until that equipment comes in. So, and then the other thing is too, in that regard, is getting your new equipment. Make sure you're testing it. Make sure you're trying it out, getting familiar with it before you take it out to the woods. Even as simple as a brand new pop-up blind. My wife got me one for last year. I try it out. Put it up in my basement, just getting the hang of being able to open it up, close it back down again. Knowing where all the anchors are. Just making sure you're familiar with your equipment before you get into the hunting situation. So the next big topic is going to be talking about getting your scouting done. Now, hopefully, over the course of the year that you have gone out and done some scouting, ideally you should have a pretty fair grasp of the areas that you plan on hunting, and have at least set boots on ground at least once by now. Now, this is one area that I have kind of faltered on. There are several areas that I've kind of hunted in the past where I kind of know the area, but there's a lot of spots I haven't explored before that I still need to get to. So that's one thing that I got to get done yet, is kind of doing another deep dive into some of those areas that I've kind of piqued my interest. So again, same thing, a lot of these areas are areas I've hunted before, but maybe not necessarily in those exact spots. So I'm familiar with the terrain for the most part, but there is some details that I still need to explore to find out if it's still a viable area. So really, it comes down to two different things I'm really looking at. Some of those new areas that I want to explore and confirm whether or not they're going to be a viable hunting spot, or how much deer are used in those areas, or if it's an area that I'm going to be hunting, or just kind of consider something that I can kind of brush off for the time being as not a really good or not very hot spot. So some of those new areas, get boots on ground, confirm whether or not they look promising or not. A lot of times I'll go through and kind of highlight 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, almost up to 10 areas at a time, or spots within an area at a time. Go through, walk through it at least one time, and confirm some of those spots that may or may not have necessarily the cover that you're looking for, or a lot of times what ends up happening is that it's just not quite what the map showed. So whether it comes down to, if you go in there and there's a lot of thick cover in there, a lot thicker than you thought, to where you won't be able to get an area to be able to shoot or anything like that, or if maybe it's wetter or more swampy than what you anticipated. Or one that I've ran into before is I go into a spot, looking at the map, and come find out it's been recently logged, so that those trees and that cover that I was looking to scout out is now open ground. So maybe the terrain was there, but all the cover is gone now. So it's good to get boots on ground in an area. That way you're not surprised, especially if you try going in there for like a morning hunt or something like that, and may not have set foot in that area before. It's very easy to get discombobulated in an area and kind of lose your way, and kind of scoop your hunt by either going too far or not going far enough into a spot. The other area that I really focus on quite a bit is revisiting spots that I know. So this happens, every year when I go into a new spot and I find something that I didn't from the year before, or learned something that I didn't, realize from the year before. It's amazing how much more you can learn about a property going back into it with kind of a new perspective, a new outlook even. I've talked with a couple of different buddies about this, where you go into a spot that you've hunted for years and you still feel like you're learning some of the nuance of those spots. And it can get really complicated too if, like, on a private piece where some of the food sources might change. If you're on egg fields, how that changes year after year after year, and how those deer react to it. Or even just learning new spots where you really didn't think the deer utilize, come find out that they're utilizing it in a certain way. So I've ran into that several times, where it's go through and come across a trail that I never encountered before, and realize, oh my gosh, there's a significant amount of deer that are cutting through the property in a way that I wasn't expecting. Or even more exciting is when you kind of walk through an area that maybe you haven't walked through in a few years, or haven't gone through at all, and realize you have a significant amount of buck sign, or you find a buck bed or something like that in there. Exploring those areas on a property that you haven't explored before, or revisiting those spots within a property that you feel like you're very familiar with, just gets you more equipped to understand that's how the deer are utilizing the property. So I'm a big proponent to going back into revisiting properties, re-scouting, and learning just a little bit more about those properties. Again, there's a lot of times you can miss something, or catch something that you might have missed before, that kind of you might have bits and pieces of information, and this new piece that you just discover can kind of put the whole picture together for you, and basically make it to where you understand the property that much more, and kind of see the big picture in regards to that. Really, that whole rant is really just comes down to you can never learn too much about a property. Scouting and more scouting, and learning about those properties and how those deer utilize the property or move along the landscape. So that way you're better prepared to be able to ambush them and hunt them. All right, now we are going to talk about something that's not as fun to talk about, but is extremely important. It's checking your equipment out. We're talking really about tree stand work. So whether you have permanent stands that you have set up, or you have set up, your climbers or your removable tree stands or your mobile setup, double checking your equipment. So if you have a permanent stand out on a private piece, go out there, double check those straps. If they look like they're worn, if they look like they need to be adjusted, make those adjustments. Even if it's questionable on how those straps are doing, double check them, loosen them up, reapply them, and make sure that they're good and solid. If you have a mobile tree stand, double check your straps. From all those time you put the tree stand up and take it down, that's a lot of abuse on those straps and buckles that you want to get those checked out. Again, for me, going with the saddle route, same thing. Double checking those loops, double checking the ropes, making sure everything's good and solid. Basically making sure that that equipment is ready to go before season. Well, you don't want to walk into your stand or your hunting location opening morning, climb up in your stand and have a catastrophic failure that's going to put you out either for the season, or injure yourself to where you either can't hunt again or you get yourself killed. So double check that stuff. Make sure your safety equipment is up to par and ready to go. Still hear of too many news articles or reports of people having hunting accidents that can be very preventable in regards to just simple safety, and just taking a few extra moments to make sure that your safety equipment is up to par and that you're safe climbing in and out of your tree stand or while you're in the stand. These are very preventable incidents that they happen too often. We'll just say that. So with the public service announcement of safety out of the way, the next thing is making sure that you have your tree stands ready to go. So again, this comes down to, if you do a little bit of scouting and you realize that maybe your stand is in the right area but not the right spot, now's the time to get that moved and secured. That way it's ready to go and you're not causing too much disturbance, getting ready for, as we get closer to the season. I myself have still, I've talked about this before as well, where my hunting blind for my rifle blind, it's in a really good spot. The problem is I put it too close to where the deer are moving. So I kind of had the idea that I was going to have this both a rifle and archery blind. The problem is that for archery season, being right on the food source, in most instances where this blind is at, is actually too close to where the deer are bedding on the edge of the food source. So I actually have walked out to the blind and had literally the tree right behind it had a rub on it. So these deer are coming right up onto the blind. Actually, a few years ago, while hunting opening morning, it was opening evening, I had a fawn basically gnawing or eating the leaves off of a willow that I use as cover for the blind itself. So it was literally right below me, eating onto the vegetation that was in my blind. So this year I'm going to move it off to one corner of my food plot. Basically give me still a good vantage point of the food plot itself, but gets me away from that cover a little bit, because part of the issue with being right on top of everything is that as you come into the stand, if there's any deer bedded within that close vicinity, they're going to hear you, they're going to smell you more than likely. And then the other thing is too, is that by the repeat going in there, leaving ground scent, it just disturbs that location just a little too much, to where I want to be pulled away a little bit, allow those deer to be able to get into the food plot and feel secure and feel as though they're kind of alone there and don't have this blind right on top of them. Certainly I ran into where, some of those old does, they know when those windows are open or closed on that blind. So by pulling away a little bit, moving outside of their comfort zone or out of their little bubble where they will maybe feel a little more secure with that blind being there, hopefully it entices more deer movement, especially from that direction where the blind was originally set. So something as simple as that, where you had it in a good spot, but it may not been the right spot. So again, that goes along with the learning of a property and be able to come up with a better game plan, the following year. So, but that's pretty much it. I mean, a lot of it is kind of, wash, rinse, repeat in regards to practicing with your bow, getting your equipment ready, scouting, making sure everything planned out, ahead of time is ready to go, food plot wise, if, basically from July to all the way up until the end of August is really when most of the people are planting along the Midwest. So now, if you're doing any habitat work in that regard, you're looking at the rain forecast, getting that seed in the ground, that we have a good food source for the winter. And for hunting season as well into the winter time as well. And yeah, I mean, certainly too is basically that time frame where you're just focusing on that detail work, dialing the last few details really, and just so you're ready to go for when the season starts. Again, it's going to be here before we know it. So we're already looking at my oldest daughter, she wants to go out and try hunting this year. She got a taste for canned venison and absolutely love it. And I told her that if she wants to have a whole lot more of it, then she needs to go out and help me, harvest some deer. And she was all in favor of it. So we're going to be practicing a little bit, getting her accustomed to doing some shooting. So we're going to start out basically with the air rifle, move up from there to a 22, move up from there, and then we'll just kind of see where her comfort level is. So it's still undecided yet on if she's going to be, hunting with a firearm or if we're going to take the crossbow out and try with the crossbow. Again, pros and cons to both of those. The rifle's got a little bit more distance where you can go out and reach and touch something. The crossbow is probably going to be a little more comfortable for her, a little less intimidating. So we'll see how it goes in those preparations as well. To see how she'll do when it comes to her time behind the trigger. So that's it for this episode, really. Again, it's a lot of just the same things that you should be, kind of nailing down every year of getting those preparations done. As a quick update as well, I do have some final details coming out on the my website, which I'm gonna have a store as well. So you'll be able to purchase these hats as well as some logo t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, hats, stickers, hoodies, and a few extra products. And then also there is going to also be a members area as well. So this will be for anyone that wants to kind of lend their support to the show and get some additional benefits out of that as well. So if you go onto the website, which I still have probably about another week or two to finish up the last few details before that's released. I'll make a full announcement when that does become available and the store is open as well. But for that membership program, it'll be $5 a month, and you get basically a special discount on all the products available on the website with the own member store. You will receive a customary t-shirt for becoming a member, as well as you'll have access to a once a month live stream that I will be doing. Again, working out a few of those last minute details to get that set up. But that will be preview for you as well. So we'll do a once a month show. I'll gather up a few friends. We'll sit around, talk about hunting or any of the topics at hand. So I'm hoping to have that live stream portion available for October. So right when we get started with the archery season, we'll be able to kick that off once a month, do updates, tell hunting stories, whatever. And again, with this live stream as well, you'll have access to a live chat, so you can join in on the conversation as well. And then also, as a member, you'll be given exclusive, access to special giveaways for members only as well. If you like the show, like the show, subscribe to the show, share the show with your friends, and yeah, I think that's a wrap. So as always, get out there, be safe, and have fun.